The envelope was pale ivory with gold embossing, addressed to me in Raymond's meticulous handwriting. I found it tucked beneath my breakfast plate that morning, next to a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice I hadn't requested. For a moment, I thought it might be an anniversary card, maybe even an apology. Raymond had been oddly detached lately. But when I opened it, I read the words, "Join us in celebrating freedom," and my stomach dropped. The date, the location, the RSVP list. It was tonight, and it was signed by Raymond. Before I continue narrating the story of Victoria Elwood, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. I stared at the invitation while the steam from my untouched coffee curled into the air. My pulse thudded in my throat as I tried to comprehend the audacity of what I was seeing. I hadn't been consulted, hadn't even sensed the storm gathering behind his cool facade. Raymond had always been a planner, a man who curated every detail of his life as if it were a corporate presentation. But this wasn't a presentation. It was an execution, and I was the last to know. The dress code said, "Cocktail formal." I chose a sleek black sheath dress, one I hadn't worn in years, with a modest neckline and a hem that grazed my knees. I applied my makeup with surgical precision, every stroke of eyeliner a reminder that I would not cry. Jewelry was minimal, just the gold necklace my mother gave me before she died, and a thin bracelet that matched. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a woman falling apart. I saw someone calculating, composed, already steps ahead. The venue was one of our restaurants, one I had named myself Thorn and Ember, a nod to contradiction, to beauty and pain. As I stepped inside, I was greeted with polite claps and knowing smiles that made my skin crawl. Friends of his, colleagues of his, people I'd dined with, and advised over wine pairings they thought Raymond had selected. They all greeted me like I was the guest of honor at a wake. And, in a way, I suppose I was. The wake of a marriage I had built with my hands and my silence. There it was, the cake, 3 tiers, white fondant, and in elaborate cursive lettering, the words, "Finally free." It sat at the center of the room like a trophy, flanked by champagne flutes and eager phone cameras. Sophia, the woman I now knew had been sleeping with my husband, leaned against the bar with a glass of rosé and a smirk that curled like cigarette smoke. Her dress was red, too bright, too bold for a guest. Unless, of course, she wasn't one. I met her gaze and didn't blink. Raymond stepped onto the small platform near the cake, holding a microphone as if he were delivering a keynote at a product launch. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice warm with artificial charm. "Tonight is about celebration, about liberation from something that's run its course." The room chuckled, drank, applauded. "Victoria, thank you for being here," he added, as if my presence were some heroic act. "Consider this year your graduation from being a burden." I walked to the platform slowly, heels clicking against the oak floor like a countdown. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I took the pen he offered with flourish and signed the divorce papers. Every stroke of ink, a calculated move in a game he didn't know he'd already lost. "There," I said softly, handing the pen back. "Graduated." The applause was immediate and nauseating. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed. Sophia kissed Raymond's cheek like she was claiming victory. But no one noticed the small smile playing on my lips. The kind you wear when you've just remembered a secret everyone else forgot. Because while they celebrated my downfall, I had just detonated the first charge in a war they hadn't even realized was coming. And it all began with that signature. 3 years ago, my father, a stoic and brilliant man who didn't trust Raymond, had insisted on one peculiar clause in our prenuptial agreement. If Raymond ever initiated a divorce or committed adultery, I would receive 65% of all marital assets, no questions asked. I thought it paranoid at the time, even offensive. But I signed it after Dad showed me the trust fund that would back the deal if it came to court. Of course, that contract had vanished until recently. A month before the party, I had found it, buried in our storage unit behind crates of old marketing materials, taped to the underside of an art portfolio labeled Summer Concepts. Raymond hadn't destroyed it. He'd hidden it, believing I would never go looking. But I had. And when I retrieved it, I took it straight to my attorney. who had it notarized and filed with the county clerk. The look on Raymond's face that night, so smug and sure, would be the last time he ever felt ahead. Because while he posed for pictures and toasted to freedom, a courier delivered copies of the reinstated agreement to every bank, accountant, and real estate agency tied to our name. Accounts were frozen, shares were flagged, property holdings were questioned. In the span of an hour, his empire became a legal quagmire. Sophia noticed first. Her laughter dulled when her phone buzzed with a denied charge from a boutique downtown. She looked at Raymond, confusion blooming like ink in water. "Something's wrong with your card," she whispered. But Raymond was too busy taking selfies with his colleagues to hear the beginning of his end. I left the party without a word, stepping into the night like someone slipping out of their own funeral. The air was cool, forgiving. My driver waited at the curb, holding the door open like it was any other night. I slid inside, removed my earrings, and exhaled for the first time in hours. My hand grazed the folder in my purse, the one that contained my backup copy of the prenuptial agreement, the one that bore only one signature, his. My attorney, Elizabeth Moreau, was waiting at my townhouse when I arrived. She wore her usual black blazer and lipstick that matched her aura, unforgiving and sharp. "You did it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "He threw the party," I replied. "I just brought the receipt." Elizabeth slid the folder from my hand and flipped through its contents with practiced fingers. Her lips curved into a smile when she reached the signature page, where Raymond's confident scrawl gleamed in black ink. "He really thought this was gone," she said, shaking her head. "Men like him always forget the paper trail." She set the folder down gently, as if it were a lit fuse that would go off exactly when we wanted. "Everything's in motion," she continued, pulling her tablet from her bag and tapping through a series of screens. "Your financial accounts are isolated, the asset division filing is prepped, and the cease and desist letters for the intellectual property are ready for courier pickup." I poured us both a glass of wine, the good kind I'd hidden from Raymond in the laundry room behind the detergent. Elizabeth accepted hers with a nod of approval and scanned the property list once more. "He'll see the filings first thing Monday morning, just as his phone starts blowing up with declined charges and confused investors." "I hope he kept a box of tissues from the party," I said, swirling my wine. "He's going to need them when he realizes what just hit him." Elizabeth's laugh was low and delighted, the sound of a woman who had watched 1,000 men underestimate the wrong person. "You'll be fine, Victoria. Everything is signed, filed, time-stamped, and legally bulletproof." She tapped her glass to mine, and the clink felt like a toast to a new empire. When she left, I took a long shower and stood under the water until my skin turned pink. The night's makeup ran down the drain in ribbons, carrying with it the last 3 years of silence I'd wrapped around my ambition. I thought of Raymond, still dancing with Sophia, believing he had finally pulled off the ultimate power move. But power, I had learned, wasn't performance, it was preparation. The next morning arrived, with a gray sky and the sound of my phone vibrating across the marble kitchen island. Messages from Marcus, Patricia, and our pastry chef Simone filled the screen, each one tinged with confusion and curiosity. They had heard about the party through the industry grapevine, a channel that moved faster than any press release. "Is it true?" Patricia wrote. "Did he actually throw a divorce party? And you signed?" I texted them all the same reply. "Don't worry, everything is under control." Then I called a staff meeting for Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock sharp and told Marcus I'd be leading it personally. His only reply was a thumbs-up emoji followed by, "About time." I smiled as I read it, my heart finally beginning to believe what my head had been planning for months. By Monday, Raymond's financial facade began crumbling like the over-leavened soufflé he used to pretend to understand. Our bank manager left a voicemail saying multiple accounts were now under legal review pending asset distribution. His personal assistant, a sweet young woman named Joy, who had never quite fit into his world of blazers and brutal ambition, emailed me a resignation letter with a note, "I always liked you better." Sophia posted a picture of herself in Mykonos that morning, but I knew it was an old one. Raymond wouldn't have been able to afford an espresso by noon. At 3 p.m., I got the first angry call from Raymond. "What the hell is happening, Victoria?" he hissed, his voice ragged. "My cards aren't working, my name's being removed from the accounts, and someone just called asking about a cease and desist." I didn't answer right away, letting the silence make its point. You said you'd be reasonable. I was, I replied, keeping my tone calm and factual. You initiated the divorce, remember? In front of 70 witnesses and a cake that said, "Finally free." I could almost hear him trying to pace, probably in the living room of his temporary apartment downtown. You made this public, I added. Now you get to live with the consequences, publicly. He hung up without another word, and I stared at the call log for a few seconds before blocking his number. My thumb hovered over Sophia's contact, still saved under brand consultant in the shared directory we used for business. But I didn't need to call her. Sophia had already made her choice the moment she raised her champagne flute at my surprise divorce. She would realize soon enough that she'd hitched herself to a man sinking faster than she could backpedal. Tuesday morning, I arrived at Victoria's table 15 minutes early and walked through the front door like I'd never been gone. The staff gathered in the dining area, seated around the long communal table we usually reserve for large parties and special events. Marcus stood at the head, arms folded, giving me a small nod of acknowledgement as I entered. Every face turned toward me, some anxious, some curious, all waiting. I took my spot at the center of the table and placed a thick envelope in front of me. Let's get one thing clear, I began, letting my eyes scan the room. This restaurant has survived and succeeded because of the people in this room, not because of press releases or photo ops. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, and I noticed Simone nodding fiercely. Raymond is no longer an owner. As of this morning, I am the sole proprietor, and every legal transfer is complete. A stunned silence fell over the room, then Patricia clapped. Slowly, others joined in, until the room was filled with applause that felt like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Marcus stepped forward and spoke without hesitation. We always knew who built this place. His voice was low but certain. Glad the paperwork finally caught up. I handed out the new staff contracts, each one revised to reflect equity shares for core team members. Marcus and Patricia would now hold partial ownership, while senior staff received profit-sharing incentives based on tenure and contribution. There were tears, real ones this time, from Simone, who whispered, I never thought anyone would do something like this. I smiled, suddenly overwhelmed by the simple power of acknowledgement. You earned it, I said. I'm just correcting the credits. By Thursday afternoon, the industry buzz had reached a fever pitch. Victoria's table was trending on regional food blogs, and the speculation was relentless. Had Raymond really been ousted from his own restaurant? Was the divorce party real? Was the signature real? What kind of woman signs away her marriage with a smile? The kind who's been planning her escape since the first time he took credit for her ideas? That's who. I didn't respond to interview requests or media inquiries. I didn't need to. The narrative would shape itself from what had already been made public, and Raymond's silence would only make it more damning. His friends were uncharacteristically quiet, their social media scrubbed of party photos. Sophia's Instagram went dark after a final post that simply read, Sometimes freedom comes at a price. It wasn't long before Rebecca called. Victoria, she said, voice thin and sour. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I almost laughed at the audacity. The woman who had toasted to my metaphorical execution was now trying to distance herself from the corpse. The party was never meant to be cruel. She lied. Raymond thought you'd appreciate closure. I gave her nothing but silence for a moment, then replied evenly. Did you rehearse that toast? I asked. Because the delivery was chilling. She fumbled for words, trying to backtrack, but the damage was done. People like Rebecca only called when they needed to manage fallout. I ended the call without another word. The legal transition was swift, thanks to Elizabeth's meticulous documentation. Raymond's remaining assets, what little hadn't been entangled in my rightful claim, were being carved apart by his own arrogance. The businesses he'd tried to keep separate were exposed as tax avoidance schemes, now under audit. His PR consultant dropped him, citing irreconcilable brand misalignment. And the board of one of our joint ventures voted to dissolve his advisory role after learning the full scope of the divorce party debacle. But Raymond wasn't completely without options. He still had the house in Montauk, the apartment downtown, and a few personal investments I hadn't touched. He also had the contract I left for him, an offer to return to Victoria's table, not as an owner, but as a salaried employee. It was the kind of job he had once considered beneath him, assistant general manager, reporting to Marcus. The salary was fair, the duties clear, and the irony bitter. For 2 weeks, he didn't respond. Then, one morning, I received a short email from his personal address, subject line, contract. No greeting, no signature, just a single attachment. I opened it, half expecting some kind of retaliation. But there it was, his signature at the bottom of the employment agreement. Raymond was coming back, to work for the woman he tried to erase. I informed Marcus privately and sent out an internal memo to the staff. The reactions were mixed, some amused, some uncomfortable. "You're really hiring him back?" Patricia asked, wide-eyed. "Won't that complicate things?" I nodded, but explained the reasoning clearly. Visibility was accountability. Raymond showed up on his first day in a crisp navy shirt and tailored slacks, looking more like a disgraced politician than a restaurant manager. He didn't make eye contact with anyone as he entered through the front doors instead of the staff entrance. Marcus met him with a clipboard and a 2-hour orientation schedule. "You'll shadow the floor staff today," he said evenly. "Victoria will check in with you next week." The sight of Raymond learning how to clock in using the tablet system he used to ignore was enough to make several kitchen staff snort quietly behind prep stations. No one mocked him openly, but no one deferred to him either. He was no longer the man they had feared or obeyed. He was just another employee in a uniform, relearning an industry he never truly understood. And for once, he had to earn everything. As the days passed, something unexpected happened. Raymond didn't fight the position. He asked questions, sometimes ignorant ones, but questions nonetheless. He apologized when he got things wrong. He stayed past his shift to wipe down bar surfaces. There was no public redemption arc, no tearful confession, but the arrogance started to erode. I watched from my office camera, the one pointed at the dining room. I saw the way customers blinked in surprise when Raymond refilled their water glasses. Some recognized him, whispering behind menus, unsure what story to believe. But he kept his head down and moved like someone who had lost the luxury of pretense. In a strange way, I felt a twinge of something close to pity. One afternoon, I found him folding linens in the back hall. "You're here early," he said, glancing up briefly. I nodded and walked past him toward the inventory shelves. "If you're looking for the new wine list," Patricia put it in the manager's binder. His voice lacked its usual performative rhythm. There was no pitch in it, no polish. "Thank you," I said, and kept walking. I didn't need to say more. The new hierarchy didn't require explanation. It was written in every task, every silence, every polite nod from the staff. Raymond might still have a last name, a resume, and a wardrobe of Italian suits. But here, he was no longer the architect of anything. He was a man relearning how to carry weight without expecting applause. The James Beard nomination arrived at the end of the month. It named me directly Victoria Elwood for innovation in sustainable sourcing and contemporary cuisine. The press release cited our zero-waste rotation program and seasonal pairing philosophy, both ideas Raymond had once dismissed as too granular for executive planning. I printed the nomination certificate and pinned it to the breakroom corkboard. No one said a word about it to Raymond. But I caught him staring at it once, long after his shift had ended. He stood there for almost 5 minutes, silent and still. I watched through the corner of the office glass, unseen. There was no tantrum, no scoff, no flippant remark. Just a man staring at the proof that history hadn't forgotten who truly built this place. On the night of the nomination gala, I wore a navy velvet gown that pooled at my feet and caught the ballroom lights like ink in motion. Marcus accompanied me in a tailored charcoal suit, the cuffs of his shirt just brushing the sleeves in quiet elegance. Patricia arrived 10 minutes later in emerald silk, and a wine-stained clutch she swore was a, quote, souvenir from service, not sabotage. We sat at a round table with a linen cloth so white it looked like untouched snow, surrounded by names and faces I'd once only read in culinary magazines. It was the first time I felt like I belonged without needing to explain who I was. As the announcer read the list of nominees, I didn't hold my breath. I didn't pray or cross my fingers under the tablecloth. I just sat still, hands folded, heart steady, already full, with the knowledge that being seen, really seen, was its own victory. When they called Victoria Elwood Victoria's table, I didn't flinch, but Marcus grabbed my hand and Patricia let out a single, sharp yes, as if the room had been waiting to exhale. I walked up to the stage and accepted the plaque with both hands. The lights were bright, but not blinding, and I could see the blurred shapes of people standing, clapping, cheering. I thought of the first recipe I ever wrote down in my college apartment kitchen, scribbled on a torn envelope next to a sink full of dishes. I thought of every supplier meeting Raymond skipped, every late night I spent in the kitchen while he networked in rooftop bars. This moment wasn't revenge. It was restoration. In my acceptance speech, I didn't mention Raymond. I didn't need to. I spoke of the staff, of the vision, of the community we built in a dining room, where strangers became regulars and meals became memory. I honored the hands that plated food with care and precision, the hearts that poured themselves into each service. I ended with a simple truth. Recognition is a light. It doesn't create brilliance. It reveals where it's always been. Back at the restaurant, the staff had decorated the kitchen with streamers and balloons in shades of gold and navy. Someone taped a photo of the plaque to the espresso machine, and Marcus wrote, "We told you so," in chalk across the specials board. Even Raymond, in his crisp uniform, clapped quietly when I returned, offering a nod that landed somewhere between respect and resignation. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and I didn't offer conversation. We had already said everything that needed saying. The weeks that followed were busy, filled with reservation surges and media interviews. I declined most of the press, redirecting attention to the team that had helped build the story. Marcus appeared in a podcast about sustainable kitchens, and Patricia hosted a wine tasting for local food critics. We weren't chasing fame. We were anchoring the legacy. Each article that featured our team was another nail in the coffin of Raymond's old myth. Sophia finally reappeared one morning in early spring. She entered through the front door like a customer, wearing oversized sunglasses and a pale beige trench coat that screamed discomfort. Raymond had just clocked in and hadn't noticed her arrival, but the staff did. Simone froze mid-sentence, and one of the newer servers dropped a glass into the sink with a clatter. I stepped out from the back hallway just as Sophia caught sight of me. She removed her sunglasses with a slow, deliberate motion. "Victoria," she said, her voice tight and too sweet. "I thought it was time we talked." I raised an eyebrow and tilted my head slightly, but said nothing. I know things got complicated. Her attempt at diplomacy was almost impressive, if I hadn't already seen her sipping champagne at my divorce party. "You mean the evening you toasted to my humiliation?" I replied, arms crossed. "Or the part where you helped orchestrate a public ambush and got caught in the fallout?" Her face flushed, but she kept her composure. "I didn't know about the clause," she said, which might have been true, but didn't change anything. "Raymond made it sound like you were already out, like it was just a formality." "Your mistake," I said, keeping my tone cool, "was assuming the woman he underestimated had no backup plan." Sophia nodded slowly, then surprised me by setting a white envelope on the hostess stand. "This is for you," she said. "It's not an apology, it's a withdrawal." I didn't touch it until she was gone. Inside was a handwritten letter and a notarized declaration that she was removing herself from any remaining business entanglements involving Raymond. There were details about a failed branding consultancy they had tried to launch, emails she had saved, and evidence of falsified timelines used in marketing decks. It was everything I didn't need, but still appreciated. Sophia wasn't trying to be noble. She was covering herself. But in doing so, she also finished what Raymond had started. When I showed Elizabeth the letter, she read it twice before speaking. "This could close the last of the asset disputes," she said. "She's documenting her separation from Raymond's ventures without prompting. That's leverage." I filed the documents with the rest of our records and marked the case as nearing completion. It felt less like victory now and more like paperwork, but that was a kind of closure too. Not every ending needed fireworks. Later that week, I walked through the dining room just before opening and paused by the reservation board. We were booked solid for the next 3 months, with a wait list stretching into summer. Our kitchen was humming, our team solid, and our wine cellar better stocked than ever. Raymond passed by me on his way to polish silverware and offered a quiet, "Good evening, Victoria." I returned the greeting with a nod, neither warm nor cold, just final. He never brought up the party again, never mentioned the cake or the laughter or the sting of what he must have realized too late was self-sabotage. And I never asked if he regretted it. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. They hang in the air, subtle and unspoken, like the aroma of a dish that tells you everything without a single word. Summer came with early blooms and a buzz of expansion rumors that spread through the culinary scene like wildfire. I hadn't confirmed anything yet, but the interest was there. 3 investors, 2 developers, and a city council representative, all requesting meetings within the same week. Marcus and I met on the rooftop garden to review preliminary blueprints for a second location, this one closer to the Arts District. He was quiet as I laid out the timeline, the permits, and the proposed kitchen layout. "Feels like we've only just gotten our name back," he said. "Now we're franchising?" "Not franchising," I corrected gently, folding the blueprints closed. "Scaling, but carefully. Each space should reflect the same core values, not become a ghost of itself." He nodded, eyes scanning the skyline as the sun dipped low. The city lights flickered on below us like the start of a performance. "You're not afraid of repeating history?" he asked. "Not this time," I said, voice steady. "This time I have the pen in my hand." And it was true. Every contract, every clause, every percentage of ownership had my name etched in ink and intention. The foundation wasn't built in secret anymore. It was in full view. If anything crumbled, it would be because I saw it coming and made peace with the fall. Raymond remained in his position, punctual, polite, and mostly invisible. He rarely engaged beyond what was necessary and never questioned direction. His presence faded into the routine of the restaurant, like a background fixture no one quite noticed anymore. The new hires didn't know him as the former owner. They knew him only as the assistant manager who folded napkins perfectly and avoided eye contact with Patricia. Sometimes I caught him watching service with a look that was hard to read, part nostalgia, part regret. He asked for additional shifts once, citing a desire to keep busy, and I approved it without comment. Marcus mentioned that Raymond had started spending breaks with a notepad, sketching out mock floor plans and writing menu ideas he never shared. Patricia said he'd stopped taking phone calls during shifts and started helping bus tables during the rush. None of it changed the past, but it created a strange sort of rhythm. As if he was slowly learning what humility looked like when it wasn't part of a brand. Isabella Rodriguez reached out in July with an invitation to co-host a panel on women-led innovation in the restaurant industry. She had followed our trajectory since the asset transfer and said the timing was ripe for disruption. Her voice still held that sharp, analytic tone I had grown to admire, a mix of respect and expectation. "I think people need to hear what real leadership looks like," she said, "especially after seeing so many paper kings lose their crowns." I accepted, knowing this would shift my visibility beyond Victoria's table. Isabella didn't curate panels for exposure. She curated them to shape the industry. The event was scheduled for late August, and the guest list was already studded with investors, journalists, and competitors. I ordered a custom pantsuit in pearl gray and scheduled additional media training, even though I didn't need it. This time, I wasn't preparing to defend myself. I was preparing to lead. The night before the event, I walked through the restaurant after close, inspecting every detail like I used to in the early days. The chairs were aligned, the cutlery polished, the ambient playlist cued to a soft, unobtrusive volume. I found Raymond still finishing paperwork at the back corner booth, his face pale under the pendant lights. He looked up when I approached but didn't speak. I sat across from him without invitation. "I heard about the panel," he said quietly, closing his folder. "Isabella always liked you more than me." I raised an eyebrow but didn't correct him. It wasn't about who she liked. She respected vision. I said, "You mistook performance for it." He didn't argue. For a moment, he just stared down at the empty glass in front of him, like it held answers. "Do you ever miss who we were before all of it?" he asked. "Before the business? Before the empire?" I didn't lie. "I miss the version of me that still thought you believed in us." He flinched, just barely, then nodded. "Fair," he murmured. "You're better without me." The statement wasn't bitter. It was factual. And maybe that was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever get from him. I left him there in the booth, not because I wanted him to feel small, but because I didn't need to prove that I had grown. The panel was held in a glass-walled conference hall overlooking the city, the skyline shining like a crown behind the stage. Isabella introduced me with words that made the audience sit straighter, a woman who turned betrayal into blueprint. When it was my turn to speak, I told the truth without embellishment. I spoke about stolen credit, silent sacrifice, and the art of walking away from what no longer serves you. I said, revenge is noisy, but resilience is quiet and far more lasting. Afterward, I was swarmed with questions from women who saw themselves in my story. One asked how I'd rebuilt trust in myself, in others. Another asked how to negotiate contracts with men who assume you'll defer. A third simply cried, then hugged me. I didn't have answers for all of them, but I reminded them, if you built it once, you can build it better, with your name on the deed this time. Back at the restaurant, Marcus met me with a grin and a bottle of champagne. The staff had gathered in the kitchen again, this time without streamers, just smiles, nods, and a handmade card that read, "The table is yours." I raised my glass to them and said nothing for a moment, letting the silence hold the weight of what we'd accomplished. Then I toasted simply, "To what we create next." The room erupted in cheers. Outside, the city was humming with late summer energy, and I stood alone for a moment under the neon glow of our sign. Victoria's table, it read, clear and unwavering, not Raymond's, not ours, mine. The first offer to acquire Victoria's table came 2 weeks after the panel. It arrived by courier in a black folder with gold trim, the kind of packaging meant to impress more than inform. Inside was a letter from a luxury hotel chain based in Singapore, offering an 8-figure sum for licensing rights and partial ownership. They wanted the name, the menu, the ethos, but not the people who built it. "They're trying to buy a soul without understanding its origin," Marcus said, flipping through the terms at our staff meeting. Patricia was less polite. "Tell them they can buy a toaster if they want something soulless," she muttered, sipping her espresso. I agreed with both of them, though I spent another night reviewing the offer just to be thorough. They saw the brand, the awards, the traction, but none of the struggle. To them, Victoria's table was a commodity. To us, it was an origin story, written in wine stains and blistered hands. I sent a respectful decline through my attorney, making it clear that Victoria's table would remain privately owned and operated. Within days, 2 more offers arrived, this time from domestic firms promising operational synergy and scalable growth. I knew those were just euphemisms for stripping away autonomy. I didn't even respond to the second one. The third, I shredded without reading because some things weren't meant to be absorbed by spreadsheets. Raymond never asked about the offers, though I knew he heard about them. He kept his head down, showing up on time, staying late, assisting without being asked. Sometimes I caught him watching Marcus lead staff meetings with a look I couldn't read. Not envy exactly, but something adjacent. Maybe recognition. The man who once performed leadership was finally seeing what real leadership looked like. In October, I launched the first in a series of pop-up dinners across the state, collaborations with chefs who shared our values. We called it the Extended Table, and each event focused on seasonal, local ingredients, blending styles, without losing identity. Marcus co-curated the menus, while Patricia handled wine pairings that sold out before the food even arrived. Every dinner ended with a round-table discussion where diners could ask about sourcing, technique, or philosophy. It turned customers into participants and restaurants into conversations. Raymond asked to join one of the pop-ups, not as a speaker, but to help with logistics. I said yes, surprised but not opposed. He handled valet coordination, guest check-in, and back-end communication with a kind of humility that didn't feel performative. When a vendor canceled last minute, he personally drove across town to secure a replacement without being told. Marcus later told me he's not the same man who threw that party. I didn't argue, but I didn't forget either. Growth and amends were two different things, and only one was guaranteed. Redemption wasn't something I was obligated to believe in. Still, the truth was this. Raymond had stopped pretending. He was showing up in ways I never thought he would. The final pop-up of the year took place in a renovated greenhouse, strung with fairy lights and warmed by tall outdoor heaters. We served a 6-course meal based on winter roots and fermented textures, paired with wines from a female-owned vineyard. Guests left with handwritten menus and jars of spiced beet jam we made in-house. At the end of the night, as we broke down the tables, I found Raymond washing dishes. No one had asked him to. "You didn't have to stay this late," I said, drying a pan beside him. He shrugged, flicking water from his hands. It felt right. He didn't look at me when he added, "It's the first time I've felt part of something worth preserving." I didn't respond. Not with words, anyway, but I didn't leave either. That December, we hosted the first annual Table Forward Gala, a fundraiser supporting culinary scholarships for underrepresented students. It was held in the same venue where Raymond had once humiliated me, the irony so sharp I could taste it. I stood on that stage again, this time to introduce the first 3 recipients of our scholarship program. The audience included industry leaders, former critics, and young women who looked at me the way I once looked at others, hopeful and ready. Raymond watched from the back, arms crossed, a quiet nod accompanying every cheer. After the event, he approached me in the hallway, away from the crowd. "You've made something untouchable," he said, voice low. "No one can take this from you." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man he might have been if ego hadn't gotten there first. "No," I said, because I finally stopped giving it away. We stood in silence, the kind that doesn't need to be broken. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a small, weathered envelope. "Found this last month while packing," he said. "It's from your father. I think it got misplaced the week of the wedding." My breath caught as I recognized the handwriting. Alone later in my office, I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, yellowed with time, with my father's unmistakable script. "Victoria," it read, "you have always been the architect of your own life. Just make sure the foundation is yours before you start building someone else's dream." I closed my eyes and felt every word land with the weight of memory and validation. The first snow came early that year, soft flakes dusting the windows of Victoria's table like sugar on creme brulee. I stood at the window with a cup of peppermint tea, watching customers laugh around candle-lit tables. Every chair was filled, every plate returned empty, every smile hard-earned. I had survived betrayal, outgrown silence, and rewritten legacy, and I had done it all without raising my voice. Just my value. The letter from my father stayed in the top drawer of my desk, folded carefully between financial projections and vendor contracts. I read it sometimes before big meetings, or when the noise of success began to blur the line between purpose and performance. He had known something back then, something I hadn't yet learned about how love can mimic ambition and how betrayal can wear cologne. That note reminded me I hadn't just inherited his name, I'd inherited his instincts. And those instincts had saved me when charm and ceremony had tried to silence them. January brought with it a windfall of opportunity and responsibility. The new space in the Arts District was finally ours, after months of negotiation and design revisions. It wasn't another Victoria's table. It was a different concept entirely, smaller, moodier, and rooted in regional flavors from the southern coast. We named it Vera's, after my grandmother who taught me how to knead dough before I could spell the word. Marcus would run the kitchen, and a young sous chef named Layla would serve as his apprentice. Vera's soft launch was invitation only, a quiet event meant for loyal suppliers, close friends, and the press we trusted. The opening menu was printed on recycled parchment, each course written in my handwriting, paired with stories instead of wine notes. Patricia created a mocktail flight for non-drinkers, surprising half the guests, with flavor combinations they couldn't explain but couldn't stop sipping. Raymond was not invited, but he knew better than to expect it. He covered the floor at Victoria's table that night with professionalism and grace, confirming reservations and checking on napkin folds like it was any other service. What surprised me most was how little I thought of him during Vera's launch. A year ago, I might have been scanning the room for signs of his disapproval or waiting for the sting of his absence to settle into my stomach. Now there was only the pulse of creation, the calm chaos of an opening night that actually felt like a beginning instead of a performance. Layla executed each dish with surgical precision, her hands steady despite the stakes. Marcus didn't hover, he guided. After service ended, we stood in the alley behind the restaurant, steam curling from our mouths as we debriefed under a sky scattered with stars. "You did it again," Marcus said, his hands tucked into the pockets of his chef's coat. "Built something out of nothing." I laughed, exhausted and glowing, the kind of glow that comes from fulfillment, not praise. "This time, I didn't build it alone," I replied. "And this time, no one else is holding the deed." The next morning brought snow and silence, rare gifts for a restaurateur. I walked into Victoria's table unannounced, still wrapped in my wool coat, cheeks red from the cold. Raymond looked up from the host's stand, and for once, his smile didn't seem practiced. "How was it?" he asked, not out of obligation but curiosity. "Vera's." I hesitated for only a second before answering. "Honest," I said. "Like starting from scratch without forgetting where you came from." He nodded, leaning slightly against the counter. "I'd like to see it someday," he said, "if that's allowed." I didn't promise anything. I just placed my gloves on the counter and moved toward the kitchen. That afternoon, the second round of scholarship applications arrived. Dozens of handwritten letters, personal essays, and food photographs from hopeful students who reminded me of younger versions of myself. One applicant from Detroit sent a video preparing his grandmother's braised oxtail while narrating why the smell of thyme always reminded him of resilience. Another girl from Tulsa included a drawing of a restaurant she dreamed of building, complete with floor plans and a menu that made me want to eat through the page. We read every single one. Patricia cried halfway through an essay from a single mother who had been cooking out of her church's basement to raise tuition money. "We have to pick 3, Marcus reminded gently, though his own eyes were red, "but we need to find a way to fund more." So I called Isabella and pitched an idea, table forward, the foundation. Not just a scholarship, but a pipeline for mentorship, internships, and eventual investment in graduate ventures. Isabella said yes before I finished the second sentence. Within a week, she matched our funding and tapped into her network for more. Raymond, overhearing part of the conversation one night, quietly asked if there would be volunteer opportunities. "I can handle training modules," he offered, "or admin stuff, if that's useful." I didn't smile, but I didn't say no. By February, we had our first 3 fellows, Tariq from Detroit, Elena from Tulsa, and Sonia from New Jersey. We flew them in, gave them aprons embroidered with their names, and walked them through every corner of Victoria's table. Marcus taught knife skills. Patricia walked them through flavor profiling. I showed them the filing cabinets. Full transparency on operations, because building something that lasts means knowing what's behind the curtain. Raymond sat in the back of the orientation room, taking notes on training modules he'd helped organize. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't insert himself into photos or praise. Tariq asked if he was the assistant manager, and I nodded without elaboration. "Cool," Tariq said, offering a fist bump. "Respect to anyone still grinding." Raymond returned it with a small nod, and I caught the quiet flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Late one evening, after the fellows had gone back to their hotel, I found Raymond alone in the walk-in, restocking produce. "You didn't have to stay this late," I said, echoing the words I'd used months ago. He shrugged, then closed the refrigerator door behind him. "You built a place people want to stay in," he said. "That's rare. I'm just trying to deserve the time I've got left in it." He didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. Not because I couldn't, but because we both knew this wasn't about redemption. It was about realignment. About knowing where you stand, even if it's no longer at the head of the table. And in that quiet moment, in the hum of cold air and reflection, I realized something. Even ghosts can learn how to take up less space. Spring announced itself with pink magnolia blossoms unfurling along the avenue outside Victoria's table. The restaurant's windows caught the afternoon sun just right, throwing long golden lines across the dining room floor like blessings from the season itself. I stood at the corner of the bar one quiet Thursday, watching a couple laugh over our citrus-marinated sea base, and thought, this is what sustainability feels like, not just in sourcing or staffing, but in self-worth, in finally creating something that didn't drain me just to keep it alive. The fellows from our first table forward cohort were halfway through their term, each thriving in their own way. Tariq had developed a limited-run dish for the weekend menu that sold out 3 nights in a row. Lena shadowed Marcus with such intensity that he joked about taking her on as a partner someday. Sonia had quietly begun auditing our inventory systems, proposing improvements that even I hadn't considered. Watching them grow was like watching roots take hold in soil I had once been told was too barren. Raymond remained steady, on time, efficient, unobtrusive. He had become the staff's silent constant, someone who ensured things got done but never made himself the center. One evening, I saw him quietly show a new hire how to polish glasses without leaving streaks, his tone even and instructional. It wasn't penance, it was contribution. And perhaps that distinction was all that ever mattered. A journalist from Culinary Lens called in late March, requesting a feature on legacy building in the post-fusion era. She wanted to shadow me for a week, take notes, observe leadership styles and structural decisions. "Everyone's seen your comeback," she said. "Now we want to understand the empire you've built." I said yes, but on one condition. The feature must include profiles of my staff. She arrived Monday morning with a notepad, a recorder, and a cautious kind of curiosity I recognized from years of interviews with people who expected facades. Instead, she got me messy, methodical, tired but fulfilled. She spent the day with Patricia in the cellar, learning about the wine program's evolution and how pairings shaped the menu's architecture. Then she followed Marcus through a prep cycle, listening to how our commitment to waste reduction changed the way we sourced, stored, and rotated inventory. With each conversation, the story she came to write began to reshape itself. On Thursday, she asked to interview Raymond. I hesitated, unsure what his response would be, but I offered him the option. He didn't flinch. "She can ask," he said simply, drying his hands on a linen towel. "Whether I answer depends on the question." They spoke for 20 minutes at the back table near the service door. She didn't record it, just scribbled notes as he talked softly about failure, ego, and learning to see value without needing to possess it. After she left, I asked if he regretted speaking. He shook his head. "It was the first time I told the truth about myself out loud." The article published the following week under the title, "The Table Rebuilt." It wasn't just about me, it was about all of us. My name was in the headline, but the story wove through Patricia's wine logic, Marcus, quiet mentorship, the fellows, firelit ambition, and, yes, even Raymond's unspoken shift from orchestrator to observer. The piece closed with a quote from me. "Leadership is not a spotlight, it's a mirror, and legacy isn't what you build, it's what survives you." That quote ended up printed on canvas and mounted near the kitchen entrance, a gift from the staff on the restaurant's 6th anniversary. Underneath it, they placed photos, one of the original team, one from the first scholarship dinner, one from the opening night at Vera's. Each image carried the weight of a chapter survived, a storm navigated, and beneath them all, a small brass plaque, founded by vision, sustained by truth. By April, the foundation had expanded. Isabella helped secure grants from 3 corporate sponsors, and we launched an accelerator for former fellows to pitch their own restaurant concepts. Elena became the first to be selected, proposing a bistro focused on indigenous Midwestern cuisine. We committed a 6-month lease, a mentor team, and startup funding matched dollar for dollar by Table Forward. When we handed her the keys, she cried like she was breaking generational silence. Raymond stood in the back of that moment too, clapping slowly with the rest of us, his face unreadable. After the event, he handed Elena a small wrapped package. I watched her open it. Inside was a set of chef's knives engraved with her initials and a note, from one restart to another. "You earned this." She hugged him briefly, and he blinked several times before walking back to the loading dock. One night, after closing, Raymond knocked on my office door. I was organizing contracts for a new vendor relationship in Charleston, distracted and bleary-eyed. "You have a minute?" he asked, standing in the threshold like a student asking permission. I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. "I'm leaving," he said. "Not because I'm running, but because I'm done holding space where I don't belong anymore." I set the folder down slowly, trying to read between the lines. "Where will you go?" I asked. "I'm not sure," he replied. "But I want to build something. For once, not with someone else's blueprint." I offered him a letter of recommendation, which he accepted with quiet gratitude. We shook hands, not as ex-spouses or cautionary tales, but as something simpler, people who had outlived a narrative. The next day, he left without ceremony. No speeches, no announcements, just a clean locker, a signed thank you card to the staff, and his name removed from the schedule. I found his name tag tucked into my office drawer that evening, beside old menus and backup keys. For a long time I stared at it, then placed it in a small box marked Archive. Not a shrine, not a warning, just history, acknowledged and filed. That night, for the first time since the party, I slept 8 uninterrupted hours. The absence Raymond left behind wasn't loud, and that's how I knew he had truly changed. There was no vacuum of ego, no imbalance in the workflow, no whispers from the staff. Just the smooth continuation of a well-oiled system he had finally learned not to disrupt. Layla stepped into more floor coordination duties. Marcus delegated with new confidence, and I found myself in the rare position of being needed less. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like leadership doing exactly what it was supposed to do. By early May, Elena's Bistro had soft-launched to a waiting list that stretched 2 weeks. She named it Echo Spoon, honoring her Lakota grandmother who'd taught her to cook with both hands and history. Isabella and I attended the launch together, seated at a corner table near the open kitchen. The menu was unapologetic. Rabbit stew, blue corn fry bread, elderberry glazed duck, all rooted in authenticity and executed with innovation. When the dessert came, burnt cedar ice cream with candied pumpkin, Elena walked out and said, "This one's for you, Chef V." The moment landed heavier than I expected, and I swallowed hard before raising my spoon. Around us, guests laughed. Servers moved like poetry, and the music floated gently in the background. This was the vision of Table Forward in its highest form, creation unchained from compromise. Elena wasn't replicating me. She was writing her own name on the deed of her future. And I felt no need to stand in front of her light to prove that I had once been the flame. Marcus and Patricia, still thriving, began mentoring a second round of fellows without waiting for permission. Tariq had been offered a sous chef position at Vera's, which he accepted with a handshake and a stunned laugh. Sonia returned to New Jersey, not out of failure, but with a full business plan and a lease agreement in hand, funded in part by a local community grant we helped her apply for. Watching them scatter across the map was like planting seeds you knew would grow without your shadow. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt multiplied. A quiet Sunday rolled around, the kind where the restaurant didn't hum. It whispered. I walked through the kitchen during pre-shift and found Marcus standing over a tray of duck confit, correcting the garnish placement with the patience of someone who loved more than he critiqued. "You remember what today is?" he asked, not looking up. I blinked, caught off guard. "Mother's Day," he said gently, "and also the anniversary of the party." I froze, my hands resting on the cool edge of the prep table. It had been exactly 1 year since I'd stood in a room full of people clapping for my humiliation. 1 year since a cake told me I was finally free, as if freedom had been a gift and not something I would have to build by hand. "Feels like another life," I said, and meant it. "Because it was," Marcus replied. That night, after dinner service, the staff surprised me with a small gathering in the garden courtyard behind the restaurant. No guests, no speeches, just warm lights, shared wine, and a single-tier cake that read 1 year forward. I laughed when I saw it, the irony not lost on anyone. Patricia handed me a glass of cava and said, "This one's not about what you left, it's about what you've created." Under the fairy lights, we toasted to growth, to grit, and to the grace of knowing when not to go back. It was quieter than that night a year ago, but infinitely more meaningful. There were no photographers, no performative toasts, no hidden agendas. Just a team who had chosen to stand with me long before it was safe to do so. And in their presence, I realized the legacy wasn't the restaurant. It was the resilience we'd nurtured inside it. The following week, I received an invitation to a symposium in Paris focused on sustainable gastronomy and cross-cultural mentorship. Isabella had recommended me for the keynote, calling it the obvious choice for someone who turned a divorce into a movement. I read the email 3 times before responding with a simple yes. Paris had once been a dream I'd set aside during the early years of building Raymond's empire. Now it felt like an earned detour, not an escape. Before leaving, I walked through Victoria's table one last time. It wasn't a goodbye, just a ritual I'd come to appreciate, like checking a house before locking the door. The staff was in good spirits, the prep was ahead of schedule, and Marcus promised to handle the week with his usual excellence. "Don't worry about a thing," he said. "We've got this. Go be global." And I knew he meant it. In Paris, I took the stage at a theater with velvet seats and gold accents, my name projected in soft white behind me. I spoke not about revenge or retribution, but about reclamation, the act of taking back not just property or reputation, but identity. I shared how I'd signed those divorce papers with a steady hand, not because I was unbroken, but because I was unfinished. The audience stood when I finished, not because I demanded it, but because they saw their own echoes in my story. Back at the hotel that night, I opened my laptop to check in. Marcus had sent a short video, Tariq plating a new appetizer at Vera's, Sonia hosting her first pre-opening tasting, and Elena teaching a staff seminar on heritage-based menus. In the background, I spotted a familiar face, Raymond, attending quietly, clapping in a corner without stepping forward. He was no longer trying to reclaim a title. He was witnessing legacy. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the headboard, city lights flickering outside the window like distant applause. There was no anger left, no pain still asking to be addressed, just space. Space for everything I was still becoming. I returned from Paris to a handwritten note taped to my office door, written in green ink and signed only with a drawing of a tiny spoon. "Welcome home, Chef V," it read. Nothing burned, nothing broke, and Lila only cried once. I laughed out loud, slipping it into the folder where I kept menus and small moments I wanted to remember. Inside the restaurant, everything hummed as it should. Order tickets printing steadily, Marcus discussing herbs with a vendor, Patricia checking cork dates without missing a beat. No one asked for a debrief, and I didn't offer one. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and grabbed an apron. Tariq greeted me with a grin, already mid-prep for the evening special. Red snapper with charred leek risotto and a blood orange reduction. "Tastes like summer trying to sneak in early," he said. I tasted the sauce and nodded, lips puckering thoughtfully. "It's bold," I said. "Let's pair it with the Gruner Veltliner. Keep it curious, not competitive." That night, Victoria's table was fully booked. The courtyard overflowed with laughter, and even the air felt celebratory. Elena had stopped in from Echo Spoon, bringing with her a friend who was opening a plant-based dessert bar across town. Sonia sent postcards from New Jersey, now framed in the break room alongside snapshots of our first scholarship dinner. These weren't just former fellows, they were founders in their own right, and in their reflections, I could finally see myself without apology. After service, I sat with Marcus on the back steps where we used to smoke cloves in the early days, too exhausted to talk, too wired to sleep. "What now?" he asked, handing me a chilled can of ginger beer. "There's always a what now with you." I took a sip and leaned against the doorframe, letting the night fold around us like a blanket. "Now," I said, "now we build something no one's ready for." The idea had been whispering in the back of my mind since Paris. Not just a restaurant or a mentorship program, but a campus. A living, breathing ecosystem where culinary education met real-world operations, where interns didn't fetch coffee, they wrote menus. Isabella loved the concept, calling it revolution disguised as infrastructure. We began sourcing properties by the end of the month, narrowing down to an old canning facility with good bones and bad lighting. Patricia was the first to see it in person, walking through the rusted corridors with a flashlight and a notebook. "It smells like opportunity," she said, grimacing at the mold in the back room. "Also mildew, mostly opportunity." Marcus sketched out an industrial kitchen blueprint in silence, while Layla paced the loading dock, envisioning classrooms. It didn't feel like starting over. It felt like scaling intention. We named it the Plate House, a place to learn, to teach, to dismantle the hierarchy between passion and paychecks. The mission wasn't just culinary, it was cultural. Food as expression, employment, equity. We filed the paperwork as a nonprofit with a for-profit training model, equal parts school, incubator, and restaurant collective. Raymond reached out a week before the announcement. I hadn't heard from him since Sonia's opening night, and the email was brief. "Congratulations. I hope you build it without compromise. Thank you for showing me how." I read it twice, not looking for subtext, just honoring that it existed. Then I archived it. No anger, no ache, just a period where there once might have been a question mark. The Plate House opened its doors the following spring to a cohort of 20, half scholarship fellows, half second-chance hires from the service industry. The first day included knife skills, food history, and a talk from Elena about how tradition could be both honored and reimagined. Sonia led a session on operational logistics, standing tall in front of a chalkboard like she'd always belonged there. Tariq ran a pop-up from the Plate House dining hall every Friday, donating a portion of proceeds to fund grocery stipends for students. The space was alive in a way that restaurants rarely are, alive with transformation. One afternoon, a student named Morgan asked if I ever regretted not walking out of that divorce party before the cake was cut. I thought about it carefully before answering. "No," I said, "because if I had walked out, I would have missed the look on everyone's face when I signed." They laughed, and I added, "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up when they expect you to disappear." That moment became part of the Plate House orientation packet under a section titled Turning Points. In the third year of operation, Victoria's Table received its second James Beard nomination, this time for Outstanding Hospitality. The press asked for interviews, and I gave a few, but always redirected the spotlight back to the people who made it possible. Our legacy wasn't just resilience, it was replication. Dozens of students had gone on to open cafes, bakeries, food trucks, and community kitchens in places the industry had overlooked for too long. We weren't just feeding people, we were feeding futures. On the 5th anniversary of the divorce party, I held a private dinner in the Plate House courtyard for everyone who had helped me rebuild. The table was long, the wine endless, the laughter effortless. No toasts, no speeches, just shared dishes and glances full of memory. At one point, Marcus leaned over and whispered, "If this is the sequel, it's better than the original." I clinked my glass to his and said, "This is the original. Everything else was just the prologue." Later that night, I stood alone in the kitchen, lights low, music off, watching the last candles flicker out. The room was still, but not empty. It was full of stories that would keep growing long after I stepped away. I touched the drawer where my father's letter still lived, now sealed in a glass frame above the pass. His words had anchored me when everything else felt like drift. Make sure the foundation is yours before you start building someone else's dream. I had done exactly that. Thank you for listening to Victoria's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.